Friedrich Wilhelm Christian Karl Ferdinand von Humboldt was a Prussian philosopher, government functionary, diplomat, and founder of the Humboldt University of Berlin, which was named after him in 1949. He is especially remembered as a linguist who made important contributions to the philosophy of language and to the theory and practice of education. In particular, he is widely recognized as having been the architect of the Humboldtian education ideal, which was used from the beginning in Prussia as a model for its system of education and eventually in countries such as the US and Japan. His younger brother, Alexander von Humboldt, was famous as a geographer, naturalist, and explorer. Biography: Humboldt was born in Potsdam, Margraviate of Brandenburg, and died in Tegel, province of Brandenburg. In June 1791, he married Caroline von der Scherer paragraph den. They had 8 children, of whom 5 survived to adulthood. Philosopher: Humboldt was a philosopher. He wrote on the limits of state action in 1791–1792, one of the boldest defenses of the liberties of the Enlightenment. It influenced John Stuart Mill's essay on liberty, through which von Humboldt's ideas became known in the English-speaking world. Humboldt outlined an early version of what Mill would later call the harm principle. The section dealing with education was published in the December 1792 issue of the Berlinische Monatsschrift under the title On Public State Education. With this publication, Humboldt took part in the philosophical debate regarding the direction of national education that was in progress in Germany, as elsewhere, after the French Revolution. Educational reforms. Humboldt had been homeschooled and never finished his comparably short university studies. Nevertheless, he became one of the most influential officials in German education. Actually, Humboldt had intended to become Minister of Education, but failed to attain that position. The Prussian king asked him to leave Rome in 1809 and to lead the Directorate of Education under Friedrich Ferdinand Alexander zu Donaueschlau bitten. Humboldt did not reply to the appointment for several weeks and would have preferred to stay on at the embassy in Rome. His wife did not return with him to Prussia. The couple met again when Humboldt stepped down from the educational post and was appointed head of the embassy in Vienna. Humboldt installed a standardized system of public instruction, from basic schools till secondary education, and founded Berlin University. He imposed a standardization of state examinations and inspections and created a special department within the ministry to oversee and design curricula, textbooks and learning aids. Humboldt's plans for reforming the Prussian school system were not published until long after his death, together with his fragment of a treatise on the theory of human education, which he had written in about 1793. Here, Humboldt states that the ultimate task of our existence is to give the fullest possible content to the concept of humanity in our own person, through the impact of actions in our own lives. This task can only be implemented through the links established between ourselves as individuals and the world around us. Humboldt's concept of education does not lend itself solely to individualistic interpretation. It is true that he always recognized the importance of the organization of individual life and the development of a wealth of individual forms, but he stressed the fact that self-education can only be continued, in the wider context of development of the world. In other words, the individual is not only entitled, but also obliged, to play his part in shaping the world around him. Humboldt's educational ideal was entirely colored by social considerations. He never believed that the human race could culminate in the attainment of a general perfection conceived in abstract terms. In 1789, he wrote in his diary that the education of the individual requires his incorporation into society and involves his links with society at large. In his essay on the theory of human education, he answered the question as to the demands which must be made of a nation, of an age and of the human race. Education, truth and virtue must be disseminated to such an extent that the concept of mankind takes on a great and dignified form in each individual. However, this shall be achieved personally by each individual, who must absorb the great mass of material offered to him by the world around him and by his inner existence, using all the possibilities of his receptiveness. he must then reshape that material with all the energies of his own activity and appropriate it to himself so as to create an interaction between his own personality and nature in a most general, active and harmonious form. Humboldt's educational model goes beyond vocational training. In a letter to the Prussian king, he wrote, "There are undeniably certain kinds of knowledge that must be of a general nature and, more importantly, a certain cultivation of the mind and character that nobody can afford to be without. People obviously cannot be good craft workers, merchants, soldiers or businessmen unless, regardless of their occupation, they are good, upstanding and according to their condition well-informed human beings and citizens. If this basis is laid through schooling, vocational skills are easily acquired later on, and a person is always free to move from one occupation to another, as so often happens in life." The philosopher Julian Nieder-Rahwan criticized discrepancies between Humboldt's ideals and the contemporary European education policy, which narrowly understands education as a preparation for the labor market, and argued that we need to decide between Mackenzie and Humboldt. Diplomat. As a successful diplomat between 1802 and 1819, Humboldt was plenipotentiary Prussian minister at Rome from 1802, ambassador at Vienna from 1812 during the closing struggles of the Napoleonic Wars, at the Congress of Prague where he was instrumental in drawing Austria to ally with Prussia and Russia against France, a signer of the peace treaty at Paris and the treaty between Prussia and defeated Saxony, at Frankfurt settling post-Napoleonic Germany, and at the Congress at Aachen in 1818. However, the increasingly reactionary policy of the Prussian government made him give up political life in 1819. And from that time forth he devoted himself solely to literature and study. Linguist. Wilhelm von Humboldt was an adept linguist and studied the Basque language. He translated Pindar and Aeschylus into German. Humboldt's work as a philologist in Basque has had more extensive impact than his other work. His visit to the Basque country resulted in researches into the early inhabitants of Spain by the help of the Basque language. In this work, Humboldt endeavored to show by examining geographical names, that at one time a race or races speaking dialects allied to modern Basque extended throughout Spain, southern France and the Balearic Islands. He identified these people with the Iberians of classical writers, and further surmised that they had been allied with the Berbers of northern Africa. Humboldt's pioneering work has been superseded in its details by modern linguistics and archaeology, but is sometimes still uncritically followed even today. He was elected a member of the American Antiquarian Society in 1820, and a foreign honorary member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1822. Humboldt died while preparing his greatest work, on the ancient Kawi language of Java, but its introduction was published in 1836 as The Heterogeneity of Language and Its Influence on the Intellectual Development of Mankind. His essay on the philosophy of speech first clearly laid down that the character and structure of a language expresses the inner life and knowledge of his speakers, and that languages must differ from one another in the same way and to the same degree as those who use them. Sounds do not become words until a meaning has been put into them, and this meaning embodies the thought of a community. What Humboldt terms the inner form of a language is just that mode of denoting the relations between the parts of a sentence which reflects the manner in which a particular body of men regards the world about them. It is the task of the morphology of speech to distinguish the various ways in which languages differ from each other as regards their inner form, and to classify and arrange them accordingly. He is credited with being the first European linguist to identify human language as a rule-governed system, rather than just a collection of words and phrases paired with meanings. This idea is one of the foundations of Noam Chomsky's theory of language. Chomsky frequently quotes Humboldt's description of language as a system which makes infinite use of finite means, meaning that an infinite number of sentences can be created using a finite number of grammatical rules. Humboldt scholar Tilman Borsch, however, notes profound differences between von Humboldt's view of language and Chomsky's. More recently, Humboldt has also been credited as an originator of the linguistic relativity hypothesis, developed by linguists Edward Sapir or Benjamin Whorf a century later. The reception of Humboldt's work remains problematic in English-speaking countries, despite the work of Lang and Brown, Manchester and Underhill, on account of his concept of what he called Weltansicht, the linguistic worldview, with Weltanschauung being translated simply as worldview, a term associated with ideologies and cultural mindsets in both German and English. The centrality of distinction in understanding Humboldt's work was set out by one of the leading contemporary German Humboldt scholars, Johann Gen Trobant, in his works in both German and French. Polish linguists, at the Lublin School in their research of Humboldt, also stressed this distinction between the worldviews of a personal or political kind and the worldview that is implicit in language as a conceptual system. However, little rigorous research in English has gone into exploring the relationship between the linguistic worldview and the transformation and maintenance of this worldview by individual speakers. One notable exception is the work of Underhill, who explores comparative linguistic studies in both creating worldviews, language, ideology and metaphor, and in ethno-linguistics and cultural concepts, truth, love, hate and war. In Underhill's work, a distinction is made between 5 forms of worldview: world perceiving, world conceiving, cultural mindset, personal world and perspective, in order to convey the distinctions Humboldt was concerned with preserving in his ethno-linguistics. Probably the most well-known linguist working with a truly Humboldtian perspective writing in English today is Anna Weizsäcker, who has published a number of comparative works on semantic universals and conceptual distinctions in language. The Rouen Ethno-Linguistics Project, in France, published online a 7-hour series of lectures on Humboldt's thought on language, with the Berlin specialist Professor Trobant. Bibliography: Socrates and Plato on the Divine. 1787 1790, Humboldt. On the Limits of State Action, first seen in 1792. Ideen zu einem Versuch, die Grenzen der Wirksamkeit des Satzes zu bestimmen, page E. Published by Each Went, 1851, aber den Geschlechtsunterschied 1794, aber Markkarenzienlich und Beobleichform 1795, Outline of a Comparative Anthropology 1797. The 18th Century 1797. Ästhetische Versuche über Goethes Hermann und Dorothea. 1799. Latium und Hellas, Geschichte des Verfalls und Untergangs der griechischen Freistaaten. 1807 1808. Pindars Olympiaden. Translation from Greek, 1816. Aeschylus Agamemnon. Translation from Greek, 1816. Aber das Vergleichungsstudium in Beziehung auf die verschiedenen Epochen der Sprachentwicklung 1820. Aber die Aufgabe des Geschichtsschreibers 1821. Researches into the early inhabitants of Spain with the help of the Basque language. 1821. Aber die Entstehung der grammatischen Formen und ihren Einfluss auf die Ideenentwicklung 1822. Upon writing and its relation to speech. 1824. Aber die unter dem Namen Bhagavad Gita bekannte Episode des Mahabharata. 1826. Aber den Duelis. 1827. On the Languages of the South Seas 1828. On Schiller and the Path of Spiritual Development. 1830. Rezension von Goethes Item Ra Paragraph Mission of Enthalt 1830. The Heterogeneity of Language and Its Influence on the Intellectual Development of Mankind 1836. New edition, on Language. On the Diversity of Human Language Construction and Its Influence on the Mental Development of the Human Species, Cambridge University Press, 2nd Rev. edition 1999. Collected writings Humboldt, Wilhelm von, Gesammeltschriften, Ausgabe der Prussischen Akademie der Wissenschaften. BD. Euro 17, Berlin 1903 Euro 36. See also, Liberalism, Contributions to Liberal Theory. Linguistics, Alexander von Humboldt, Ferdinand de Saussure. Notes. Further reading, G. W. F. Hegel, 1827. On the episode of the Mahabharata known by the name Bhagavad Gita. David Sorkin, Wilhelm von Humboldt, The Theory and Practice of Self-Formation, 1791-1810 in, Journal of the History of Ideas, Volume 44. Number 1, pages 55-73. Antoine Berman LA Copyright Proved LA Copyright Stranger. Culture A Traduction dans l'Allemagne romantique, Herder, Goethe, Schlegel, Novalis, Humboldt, Schleiermacher, Haar Paragraph Luglin, Paris, Gallimard, Essays, 1984. ISBN 978-2-07-07076-9. Koldo Mittliner. G. de Humboldt et la langue basque, Lenguae Historia. Madrid, Paraninfo, 1985. ISBN 84-283-1379-2, Tillman Borsch, Wilhelm von Humboldt Massachusetts 1/4 NCHEN, Beck, 1990. ISBN 3-406-33218-8. Marina Lalata Costa Bosa, Rajan e Tradizione, il pensiero giuridico ed etico politico di Wilhelm von Humboldt, Milano, Jufra, 2000. ISBN 88-14-08219-7. Ear plus or minus Aki Zabaltagorod Xatagy, W. von Humboldts Forschungen 1/4 Ber die Baskische Nation und Sprache und Bedeutung für 1/4 aus seine Anthropology. Karl Paragraph LN, 1998. Realino Mara, La Regione il Caso. Il processo costituente nel realismo storico di Wilhelm von Humboldt, a materiale per una storia della cultura giuridica, XXXII, 2002, pages 453-64. Lucina Stubb, Wilhelm von Humboldt's Philosophy of Language, Its Sources and Influence, Edwin Mellen Press, 2002. John Roberts, German Liberalism and Wilhelm von Humboldt, A Reassessment, Mosaic Press, 2002, Jacques Azulmendi, in die Entwicklung der Achtung und Liebe. Humboldt a 1/4 Ber die Baskische Landschaft, RIEV, 48-1, 125-142, Yusko I Kaskuntsa, 2003 ISSN 0212-7016, Jacques Azulmendi, Humboldt. Hitskuntsa et Pensarmandua, Bilbo, UEU, 2007. ISBN 978-84-8438-099-3. Franz Schulthius, Le Corchima de Humboldt, Les rares copyright forms de la Euro unregistered trademark enseignement super copyright RIA Europa copyright N, Paris, Raisons da Euro unregistered trademark Agora copyright editions, 2008. ISBN 978-2-912107-40-4. Trobant, Humboldt ou l'essence du langage, Modega, 1995. Trobant, Espracine, l'essence du langage, de la linguistique et de la philosophie du langage en la pensée copyrightée dans la langue. Humboldt et April S., PUV, 1995. Trobant, du gar copyright ni au gar nes des langues et le gar copyright ni des langues. Essays et Savoirs PUV, 2000, Trobant, Traditions de Humboldt, a Permil Editions de la Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, Paris, 1999. Trobant a Quandli Europe publie Herder, Humboldt et les langues, Revue Germanique Internationale, 2003, 20, 153-165. Underhill, James W. Humboldt, Worldview and Language, Edinburgh, Edinburgh University Press, 2009. Underhill, James W. Ethnolinguistics and Cultural Concepts, Truth, Love, Hate and War, Cambridge, Cambridge University Press, 2012. Jean-Marie Valentin, Alexander von Humboldt, 150 Anniversaire des Arts Morts, Paris, Didier Permel Rudition. 2011. ISBN 978-2-252-03756-0. Michael N. Forster, German Philosophy of Language, Oxford, Oxford University Press, 2011. ISBN 978-0-19-960481-4. External links, Lives of the Brothers Humboldt, an extensive biography available from the Million Book Project, Wilhelm von Humboldt. Entry by Kurt Müller-Vollmer in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Humboldt University site. Brief eulogy, Wilhelm v. Humboldt. A brief information page from the Acton Institute. Works by Wilhelm von Humboldt at Project Gutenberg. Works by or about Wilhelm von Humboldt at Internet Archive. Works by Wilhelm von Humboldt at LibriVox, German. Works by Wilhelm von Humboldt. A partial list from Zenode.org. The German Classics of the 19th and 20th Centuries. Wilhelm von Humboldt, The Sphere and Duties of Government. A passages.